Hello, thank you for tuning in. I'm covering a book review today by Timothy Williamson, who's a philosophy professor. The title of the book is called Doing Philosophy. This one right here. Hi, thank you again for tuning in. So the book Doing Philosophy is a method of doing philosophy by Timothy Williamson. He has over 4 decades of philosophy study and lectures. His CV that I've had a brief look on is about 37 pages long. So he's done a lot of publications and a lot of studies. He's involved in many universities across the world, so he's quite decorated and knowledgeable about philosophy. From my understanding, based on his self-description in the book, he's non-religious, but as a Christian, I found his level of writing to be quite level. I could relate mostly to what he was saying, and it made a lot of sense to me. So this is the kind of book that I highly recommend to anyone interested in doing philosophy. He kicks off the book with a brief look at common sense. What is common sense and the role it plays in philosophy? Because we use common sense to test everything in philosophy. So he does a nice job of bringing that forward ahead of everyone, so that they understand the role of common sense and philosophy, that it's not too far removed. Many people will feel that philosophy is an ivory tower study, but Timothy argues differently. He says it's basically everything we do is philosophy. Which is that what he wants us to do is to move from a place of unguided intuition on philosophy to a more robust and disciplined study where we think more carefully, critically about everything. Next up, he speaks about the role of disputing, because in philosophy, it's not about books or studies, it's about arguing. Refining our thoughts, testing our theories against those of competing cultures and understanding. By doing so, we build ourselves, and in turn, they are built by what we cover. So disputing plays a critical role in philosophy. I believe that in my worldview of Christianity, where a lot of people will say you have to subject yourself to your pastor's authority, you have to do what your pastors say, and that's not true of the Bible, because in the Bible we see Paul being challenged by the Berean Christian. They take the Bible, compare his teachings and say, do these two things stack up? And what happens is Paul salutes them. He doesn't chastise them and say, hey, what are you doing questioning me, the apostle of Christ? He says we need to emulate the Berean Christian and engage in dialogue as Christians. Today a pastor will come into the church, teach nonsense. When you speak up, they'll waive their educational credentials, they'll waive their experience in ministry, they'll waive their positions as an argument, which is fallacious, because Paul welcomed discussions. Jesus went to the temple, sat with Pharisees, questioned them, answered questions himself. So there is no way where we can do Christianity without borrowing from philosophy and thinking through ideas, by testing one another, by arguing robustly and testing our pronouncements because of their far-reaching implications. When we preach, we bind people's conscience to what we are talking about. So it is critical that we enter into a dialogue. After someone is finished, we sit down, review, and talk and learn from each other, so that next week someone could be an improvement from today's learnings. Next up, he talks a lot about thought experiments. Even though they enjoy their own chapter, they still filter further on, because you can't separate philosophy from thought experiments. Williamson makes a case for thought experiments, why we should engage them, why they're critical in philosophy, and why we can't do philosophy without them. He does obviously compare that to experiments, to intuition and using our imagination, and basically he makes a compelling case this chapter is quite lively. Next up, it's when we compare theories, looking at the inference to the best explanation, looking at rival theories, how do we work those two? And what was interesting was that he spoke of the turf war between science as well as theology. He says that battle between science and theology always is done in the valley of philosophy. And that was interesting because if you look at other philosophers like Stephen Jay Gould, who will say theology and science occupy non-overlapping magisteria. Timothy Williamson says no, there is a lingua franca, a common language between theology and science, and that's philosophy. That's where the battle is fought. So a good grasp of philosophy can enable Christians and atheists to engage in a battle of ideas, to say, okay, how can we reconcile faith in God to science? You know, using a valuable tool between theology and science. And then what was interesting was a chapter on deduction. There's something very hard-hitting that I never imagined. I thought we human beings are the only creatures capable of reasoning, but as you encounter a chapter, you're gonna be illuminated. So I highly encourage you to pick up the book and get ahead to reading it. And then he goes to at length on the history of philosophy and highlights why it's never brought into focus. It's always like a bokeh in photography in a low aperture where there's not a depth of field as far as philosophy. We look at the philosophers and we look at their theories, but we never look at the entire sweep of philosophy. So Timothy makes a case for that. And then what was interesting there was that he was trying by all means to show how philosophy and science are related far more closely than science is to mathematics itself. That was a beautiful picture that he painted for us. And then lastly, he covers the relationship between philosophy and human sciences, computer sciences. In that regard, he obviously made a use, as you might have guessed, Alan Turing's case, how his thinking affected the generation of computing. He looks at political philosophy, he looks at anthropology, and how philosophy recharges those disciplines and how they in turn recharge philosophy. And lastly, he speaks about mathematics and how we build models, looking at simplicity and how simplicity can illuminate our thinking. So all in all, this is the kind of book that one buys, reads once, and then rereads occasionally. It's important that as you encounter like a subject that touches on a chapter, go back, read the chapter, because it's always like it's a flat book. It's not high on prose, but every once in a while you get hit with a breath of fresh air, novel ideas that you never thought of. So this book does make you a teeny bit smarter. So if you like this review, consider looking at this book. I'm not paid to promote it, I'm just reviewing it. Below you'll find the description and some of the thoughts I've shared in more detail, as well as the links that I've used. Share your comments, tell me which book you find to be excellent in giving us an overview of philosophy. Thank you for watching. Catch you next time.